It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight with me, Anna Jones. Coming up, the teenager accused of murdering 3 young girls in Southport is facing a terror charge. Already charged with 3 counts of murder for the attacks, 18-year-old Axel Ruda faces new separate charges after police say they found a biological toxin and an Al-Qaeda training manual at his home. Also tonight, on the eve of the budget, the government announces a rise to the national minimum wage. The Chancellor says it marks a significant step in achieving Labour's promise of a genuine living wage for workers. But with employers' national insurance also expected to rise tomorrow, what sort of impact would it have on businesses? Plus, a new cancer treatment shrinks a 62-year-old man's brain tumour in half in only a matter of weeks. We'll speak to the lead doctor behind that trial. And Manchester United look to be closing in on a new manager, with Sporting Lisbon's Ruben Amorim expected to head to Old Trafford. We'll have the latest details with our sports presenter, Teddy Draper. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. Scroll up. Now, the teenager accused of stabbing to death 3 young girls at a Taylor Swift dance event in Southport is facing 2 new charges tonight. 18-year-old Axel Ruda has already been charged with 3 counts of murder, but these new separate charges include one of terror after police say they found a biological toxin and an Al-Qaeda training manual in a search of his home. Our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milan, reports.
Axel Ruda was already facing trial on charges of murdering 3 young girls at a summer holiday dance class. Elsie Stancombe, B.B. King and Elise Aguiar were stabbed to death at a Taylor Swift-themed event in Southport in July. But police searches at Ruda home have now led to new charges, that he produced the biological toxin ricin and had a PDF labelled as an Al-Qaeda training manual, useful, police say, to anyone preparing an act of terrorism. The Chief Constable, alongside government health and scientific experts, announced the charges, she said, to be open and transparent, but July's event still not classified as an act of terror.
At this time, counter-terrorism policing has not declared the events of the 29th of July a terrorist incident. I recognise that these new charges may lead to speculation. The matter for which Axel Ruda has been charged under the Terrorism Act does not require motive to be established.
Ricin is a highly potent toxin. What was found, police say, posed a very low risk to the public. They are confident no one was harmed.
There was no evidence that any victims, responders or members of the public were exposed to ricin, either as part of the incident or afterwards. Our detailed initial risk assessment judged that the risk to the community and to the wider public was low.
The incident in July was followed by days of violent disorder. The police have urged people to avoid rumour and speculation and not believe what they see on social media. The Chief Constable also offered reassurance to the community here in Southport and beyond that they remained committed to getting justice for the families of those 3 young girls who died, the 10 who were injured and the others who were present that day. A reminder of the people at the very heart of what happened here. Axel Ruda will appear in court to face the new charges tomorrow. He was already due to go on trial in January. The police urging everyone not to lose sight of the families who lost so much here. Greg Milam, Sky News, Southport.
Well, after announcing the charges earlier, Merseyside Police urged the public not to engage in rumour and speculation and promised to be open and transparent.
You may have seen speculation online that the police are deciding to keep information from the public. This is certainly not the case. We have been given extensive guidance by the Crown Prosecution Service in relation to what we can say publicly to ensure the integrity of the court proceedings are protected. And therefore we are restricted in what we can share with you now the proceedings are live.
Now, tomorrow marks a defining moment for the new government, with Rachel Reeves set to deliver the first Labour budget in more than 14 years. Tonight, the Chancellor revealed that a rise in the minimum wage will be one of the measures announced, pushing up the pay of the lowest earners to £12.21 an hour. But it comes as analysis by Sky's data team shows it's not just low-income households struggling ahead of the budget, but an increasing number of middle-income households too, as our national correspondent Tom Parmenter reports.
They're the bills that hit hard every month. And Lowry, like many, is struggling to make it work.
It's almost like you're drowning daily, trying to find money.
To understand it, we mapped it out.
When you look at it like this and you realise that every penny you have coming in is paying just bills, it's the big amounts, these, you know. It's actually quite frightening.
Which of these is the hardest to wrestle with?
I think energy, because the energy, I never get on top of it.
She's a single mum who works part-time in Lancashire and receives universal credit, but just can't keep up.
I mean, there's days I don't have any money in the bank at all. So when the bills are paid, there's nothing left.
At all?
Nothing. Nothing. Often.
If she worked more hours, she would lose things like her council tax exemption. This battle to keep afloat is painful.
I've become so numb to the outside world and living and everything now, I almost feel like I'm detached. So really detached, emotionally detached from things. My daughter apologises on a regular basis if she asks for anything. And children shouldn't be having to do that. She shouldn't feel like she's done something wrong to ask for something.
These types of costs present challenges to households all over the country, whatever their income, whether they're in the kind of struggle that Lowry's in, whether they're just trying to get by on a living wage, or indeed, if they're a family with two good incomes.
Like the Matthewmans, who live in Essex with their 3 daughters.
Let's start with food.
800.
Tracy teaches in a primary school and Chris looks after the fleet of vehicles his company uses. He's got a spreadsheet to manage everything they have to pay for.
School dinners, breakfast clubs, school trips, childcare,
Birthdays.
netball club, everything.
I think he's on there every day normally, tinkering with it in some way, seeing where we can save money.
Their combined income means they should be comfortable.
We are only one paycheck away from not being able to afford all of the things on our budget.
I don't feel like there is an end, and I don't feel like there's a fix. I think something drastic has to happen.
The percentage of the cost of living is going up compared to our wages, and everyone's just expected to accept that. Everyone's expected to just carry on and somehow manage. But there are lots of families that can't manage.
That struggle has become far too normal for millions across this nation. They're looking to the Chancellor for help. Tom Parmenter, Sky News.
Well, tomorrow we'll get full details of the new government's plans for taxes and for spending. But some of what the Chancellor is set to announce has already been trailed. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has been going through the numbers to see how it all stacks up.
With the budget coming up, we're about to be engulfed with all sorts of numbers, data. I want to give you just 2 big numbers, OK, because this tells most of the story. Ultimately, what is a budget about? It's about the difference between these 2 bars here. This is taxes, so the money that's coming into the exchequer, and that is spending, the red bar there. And you can see the spending, £1.2 trillion, is considerably bigger than the money coming in to the exchequer. And that is why, difference between those 2 bars, that's basically why we have a deficit. That's borrowing there, £122 billion. And a lot of the policy that we've had in recent years, a lot of those fiscal rules we keep hearing about, it's all about bringing those 2 bars so they are closer to each other, so you're not borrowing as much. And that means kind of going and thinking about what is within those bars. So look at spending. You've got social security, welfare, you've got health, you've got other departments, you've got interest and investment. And then on taxes, it's been about looking at things like income tax, national insurance, VAT. Previously, though, the easiest thing that people have cut when they wanted to bring this bar in particular down was investment. So George Osborne did this, and Jeremy Hunt was planning to bring investment down in order to meet his rules. Look at where investment was planned to go in the coming years. It was going to go down, down, down. Rachel Reeves says she wants to keep it higher. And that would potentially mean, you know, it's possible, but it would potentially mean billions of pounds, tens of billions of pounds, maybe 30 billion pounds to keep it where it is right now, which, back to the big picture, means this gets even bigger. Now, one solution to try and bring these bars closer to each other is to try and raise this one. So, for instance, national insurance, that's one thing that's been mooted, higher employer national insurance contributions. An alternative, slightly more tricky way of doing it, or tricksy way of doing it, is to change the definition of those fiscal rules. And there's two rules. And interestingly, in both of them, it looks like Rachel Reeves is going to omit investment. Look, it's just disappeared from that, which means all of a sudden, the red bar is actually smaller than the blue bar. Now, a lot of people have been looking at this and saying, hang on, aren't markets going to see this as a bit of a fiddle? Aren't they going to start to panic? And they point to charts like this. This is showing the rate at which the UK government borrows right now in financial markets, and that has been going higher. And so some people are saying, look, is this a sign that markets are panicking? It's over 4.2%. Well, maybe, but maybe not, because look at what the US is having to pay at the moment on the same debt. It's going up at the same rate as well. And actually, if you compare the UK with the US and Germany, this has been the range at which our debt has traded ahead of budgets back in the past. So anything within those lines is perhaps seen as the safety zone. And look at where UK government debt is right now. In other words, markets are not panicking, which is a clear contrast with what happened in the run-up to the mini-budget in 2022.
Well, how could the rise in the minimum wage impact businesses? Well, Toby Dicker is founder of the Salon Employers Association, and he told Sky News that firms may have to lay off their apprentices and says that employers are not being listened to.
It means that potentially people are going to lose their homes and lose their apprenticeships and lose their opportunity to grow because you haven't listened. It's so frustrating. I am shaking, I'm sorry. We were ignored by the previous government. We were told, oh, we can't do anything about that. And then we were cancelled. We were taken out of meetings. And I'm frustrated for the employers in our industry. They're done.
Well, let's get a reaction now from Nye Cominetti, who's a principal economist at the Resolution Foundation. Very good evening to you. Thanks so much for talking to us tonight. So, a 6.7% rise in the minimum wage to £12.21, well above inflation, and also the biggest rise for 18 to 20-year-olds on record. So, do you welcome the government's move tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's good news for low-paid workers. It's one of the, I suppose, definite things that the government can do in this budget to bring some good news. To put that 6.7% in context, it's lower than the very large increases we had in the last 2 years. But as you said, it's still going to be a really healthy real terms increase, possibly in the region of 4%, depending on what happens to inflation. And that's definitely more than is going to be the case for average workers. So, yeah, I think that is a good, that's definitely good news. Obviously, there are always questions about how do businesses pay for it. There are questions about, do they pass on some of those wage increases to prices? But that's been the story about the minimum wage for the last 25 years. There's always been that question. We raise pay for low earners, and then how do businesses pay for it? And the story so far has been they have been able to do so. So, yes, my view is definitely it's good news.
Well, yes, I want to talk a little bit more about what businesses might do in a moment. But first, the actual wage itself, is it enough to live on? Do you feel that it's a comfortable amount for people to earn?
So it's still lower than the real living wage as calculated by the Living Wage Foundation. So the government's language implies it wants to move in that direction, but it hasn't quite got there yet. I think the main thing to acknowledge is that the minimum wage can't do everything. So if you want to tackle poverty or low incomes, really the best way to do that is action through the tax and benefit system. And so, there are questions about the 2-child limit, for example. So, if you're let's say a single earner in a family with, a few kids, the minimum wage is not going to be a particularly high wage. So that's why those people need support in the benefit system as well.
OK, but generally, this is good news for lower paid workers. So what about what it does mean for businesses? Because we also understand that tomorrow the Chancellor is going to announce that employers' national insurance is going to go up as well. Are businesses really going to be clobbered here?
Yeah, so there's a few things to say about that. So firstly, the pattern of the minimum wage going up faster or at or faster than average wages, that has been happening for at least 10 years now. So I think many employers will have become used to that. They might have hoped for a lower, up rating, but that wasn't what was happening under the Conservatives. And that's not what's going to happen now. As I said, the question is, how far can you raise the minimum wage before you start to see those adverse effects? So in general, we might think we don't particularly mind if businesses accept lower profits or find ways of adjusting workforce or manage things differently. But what we don't want is for jobs to start getting lost, for employers to say, well, we're not going to hire the extra person. Overall, the evidence says that in the last 25 years, that hasn't happened. We've massively raised pay for the lowest earners and employment is still high. We went into the pandemic with employment at record levels in this country. So the question is, can you keep pulling off that trick, raising pay without costing jobs? And ultimately, that's an empirical question. So we have to do this policy, raise the minimum wage, and then study the evidence to see what happens. But like I said, so far, that has been possible with the minimum wage, and I hope that will continue to be the case.
Well, you say you hope. What's your instinct? Do you think that this move, in combination with other moves on businesses, do you think it could have an impact on jobs this time round?
It's very hard to know. I think you're right to mention that the increase in employer national insurance contributions will bite as well. So, I would expect to see some small businesses finding that difficult. That hasn't been the case in the past. For example, we went into the last couple of large increases in the minimum wage with NICs being cut. So it is a slightly different circumstance. But ultimately, it all boils down to much the same. We're increasing wage costs in one way or another. And the question is, can employers continue to bear it? Like I said, so far they have been able to. And it's really an empirical question about, can they continue to do so? You could push back a little bit on some of the warnings you get from employers. Every year, more or less, we get, warnings, especially from, for example, the hospitality sector, warning of really dire job losses, pubs are going to shut and that kind of thing. And there's no doubt that many of those businesses will be feeling pressure. But what hasn't happened is these kind of, apocalyptic, effects that we tend to hear about. So I think the main thing to do is just to be balanced, to be willing to look at the evidence, and then to change course if we have to, but not to get too excited ahead of time.
Do you think that smaller companies should be offered some kind of protection, or not have to pay the worst of the rises?
I don't, and it's a very difficult question, because you might like having an economy with lots of small businesses. We like walking down the high street with independent shops and so on. But in general, speaking as an economist, large businesses tend to pay more. That's where, higher productivity activities tend to happen. And in this country, we've got a very long-standing productivity problem. So in general, I would prefer that if we're going to try and give some businesses an easier time, it would be those younger, potentially fast-growing businesses, not businesses that just happen to be small. But I do understand that that's not necessarily a view that everyone will share.
And I guess the other argument is, apart from the fact that you want people to be paid a decent wage and be able to afford more, the hope as well is that they will then spend more, and that'll be good for the economy, and there'll be a knock-on effect which will be good for businesses as well.
Yeah, that's right. Those are those effects as well. I mean, in general, I don't think we think about the minimum wage as having particularly big impacts on GDP. It might have some small effects, but that's not really what it's doing. It's mainly putting more money into some of the lowest paid workers in the country, social care workers, cleaners, people working in bars. So I think that's, first of all, we should concentrate on that headline effect, and then, leave it for the academics to try and tease out those smaller effects. But yeah, mainly it's a good news story because it's putting more money into the pockets of low paid workers. Yeah.
And just one other thing very quickly, no one wants to feel like they're on the minimum wage. They don't want to feel I'm being paid the least that is legally possible. So does it add to a sort of pressure on employers to pay more? Because people will be going to them saying, you really are paying me the absolute minimum, I deserve more than that.
That's a really good question. So one of the interesting things the minimum wage does is it causes pay compression. That's literally what the policy is. It's to raise the level of minimum hourly pay compared to the median. So literally it closes the gap between the bottom and the middle. One of the effects of that is positive. It means that employers, they want to preserve some of those pay differentials. They want to make sure that a retail manager is paid a bit more than a retail, someone working on the shop floor. And so they try to preserve those pay gaps. What we've seen in the last 10 years is that some of those gaps have come down a bit, but they still exist. But that means that the effect of the minimum wage isn't just on the bottom earners. It's actually applies throughout the bottom third of the workforce. So several million people will see their pay get pushed up by that pay at the bottom. But you're right, not everyone likes feeling like they're getting close to that wage floor. Most people would like to say I'm paid based on my skills and the value I offer to my employer, not just because the government has forced my employer to raise my pay. So you're right, it does bring up sort of difficult questions of value and how employers pay workers. But overall, I would still come down on the side of it's been a definite force for good.
OK, well, Nye Cominetti, really good to talk to you tonight. Thanks so much for your views. Speaking there for the Resolution Foundation. Thank you. And a reminder that you can, of course, watch full coverage of the budget tomorrow from 10 a.m. live on Sky News. And we'll also have a special edition of the UK Tonight, getting reaction to the budget with Sarah J. Mee live in Grimsby at 8 p.m. tomorrow evening. Meanwhile, still to come on the UK Tonight, calls for better support as new research finds that care leavers are around 9 times more likely to become homeless than their peers. Also ahead, a man's brain tumour shrinks by half just weeks into a new cancer treatment trial. I'll speak to the doctor leading the research. And could Ruben Amorim be Manchester United's boss by this weekend? We'll have all the latest as the club moves to secure a new manager.
All right, ready?
Not really.
We've heard it could be painful.
A bit more pain now, free up more money to spend.
But will it be as the government claims?
Ow! The pain now is just too much to bear.
Temporary pain for long-term gain.
Right, all done.
Not bad, actually.
The budget, the full story, first on Sky News.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News, get the full story first. Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
Significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Now, young adults leaving care are around 9 times more likely to become homeless than their peers. That's according to new research from the charity Become, which is calling on the government to do more to support care leavers as they reach adulthood. Well, let's chat about this a little bit more. I'm joined by Andy Elvin, who's the Chief Executive of the fostering charity, the Adolescent and Children's Trust. Very good evening to you. Thanks so much for coming in.
No problem.
What do you make of this research by Become? Young adult care leavers 9 times more likely to be homeless than their peers. Are you surprised by statistics like that?
Not surprised at all. It's been around for years. If you think about it, we have this strange situation where some of the most vulnerable children in the country are treated more harshly than children in the general population. So if you're living in the general population, you go out with your own parents, the average age you leave home now, according to the Office of National Statistics, is 25 years old. If you grow up in residential care, you have to leave at 18. And people think of, you know, how many of their teenagers at home at 18, do they really think are ready to be out in the outside world? And the children we're looking after have more disadvantages than that. With foster care, it's a bit better. You can stay until 21, but that depends on your foster carer being able to keep you between 18 and 21. And though there's a scheme called Staying Put, which is a very good policy, it's been enacted very badly, and it's leading to foster carers basically having to subsidise the scheme, which is not a great look.
So what happens to a young person at 18? They have to move out of their residential care or potentially away from foster families if they can't afford to carry on keeping them. So what happens to them? Do they have property found for them? How much support do they get?
Sometimes they're property found for them, but it might not be altogether suitable because there's a complete shortage of suitable social accommodation and social housing these days because we've spent the last 70 years not building enough social housing, and in the 1980s we sold it all off and didn't build anymore. So the shortage cuts through to these vulnerable people, so they might be placed in undesirable areas, they might be placed a long way from their support networks, they're probably placed with not a lot of support. Some drift back to birth families. Sometimes those birth families might not be altogether functional. They might not be the best environments for those young people. So the gains that perhaps were made while they were in care can get lost. And they are very vulnerable because if something goes wrong for them, if they become made homeless, if they lose a job, if a relationship breaks down, for general population children, they go back home. Their parents will always welcome them back. There'll be a spare room, there'll be a sofa, there's somewhere you can go to. So you're not faced with the prospect of homelessness. It's not many steps to homelessness for children who've grown up in care.
And there's this phrase, care cliff, isn't there? Like a cliff edge when you're 18, that you've had that support around you from the residential site or from your foster family, and then suddenly it feels like you don't have any support. So what is out there for people? Do they have advice about careers and applying for jobs? Have they got access to tech? I mean, what kind of support is there?
In theory, the support is meant to be there. And if you think about it, these children should be the most advantaged children in the country. Their parent is the state. It's the government. It has limitless resources. But sadly, the government and the state, so us all, because it's on behalf of us, are a very neglectful parent. What kind of parent decides that they're no longer your parent when you're 18 or 21? And so you might get advice and guidance, but the suitability and the consistency of workers is not great. There's usually a high turnover. Children very soon get lost in their late teens and early 20s. And we really need to change our mindset. When you're a parent for life. People accept that, you know, they're still mum and dad when you're 25, when you're 35, sometimes when you're in your 40s. That still happens. We should have that for children in care. And there's no reason we can't have it. The reason we don't have it is we're choosing not to. We're choosing not to be a parent. And in the absence of the death penalty in this country, removing someone's children is the most draconian thing we do. So if we're removing someone's children and then we're abandoning them at 18 or 21, what are we doing? You know, if we're going to remove children, we have to do better. And at the moment, particularly for care leavers, we're just not doing better.
And you say their parent is the state, and the state has limitless resources, and yet the government would say, we do have limited resources, unfortunately, that it's tough economic times, and we have to prioritise those resources. So, given that context, what do you think the government should do?
Well, they can prioritise the fact that there is social housing available, so they prioritise children who've been in care for that social housing. There are things you can do through income foregone, so you can give free tuition fees, because student loans are smoke and mirrors anyway, frankly. So you can give free tuition fees to all those who've been through the care system. Apprenticeships are in the gift of the government. You could guarantee an apprenticeship to all the children leaving care. We need to be the sharp elbow middle classes for our children in care, giving them the leg up we give our own children. The difficulty is that politicians do not think of children in care as their children in the way they think as their own children as children. Until we shift that culture, we're not going to get anywhere.
And what about the rest of us? Are there advantages to employers being a bit more aware and proactively trying to help? Is there other things that people more broadly in society can do to help?
Absolutely. You look at great people like the John Lewis Partnership. They've done a lot of good work in working with care leavers and being a care-experienced, aware employer. And they could be foster-friendly employers, giving time off to people fostering. And things we can do more generally is people can consider fostering. We have a fostering crisis in the country. Because of the cost of living crisis and interest rates, there's far fewer empty rooms in houses. Kids have gone off to university, they've come back again. There are no spare rooms because they can't afford to move out because the rental market's broken and interest rates are too high. So we need more people to consider fostering. And if people have room in their house, if they've got a spare room and room in their heart, they could become foster carers. And that's one of the biggest ways of improving what's happening at the moment.
Do you have any sense of optimism for the future, that things will improve? There's talk about building more affordable housing, for example. We're just hearing about the national minimum wage going up. Do you feel at all positive about the future for this?
It does, yeah, it does seem that we are moving to a place now where there will be a tax base that will support public services again. And if you remember back to, it took from 1997, it took about 3 years for money to flow back into the public sector and the NHS and the social care system to begin to be refloated again. I suspect we'll see something similar now. But every week we're seeing new people approved as foster carers at fostering panels. There are great people out there opening up their hearts and their homes. And as long as that happens, then there's always hope.
OK, well, Andy, Elvin, we really appreciate you coming in and talking to us about this very important subject.
Thank you very much indeed.
Do stay with us. Still to come here on the UK Tonight. A man's brain tumour shrinks by half just weeks into a new cancer treatment trial. We'll hear from the doctor leading that research. Plus, the Spice Girls' child doppelgangers who want to get the band back together. Now, a reminder of our top story this evening. The teenager accused of stabbing to death 3 young girls at a Taylor Swift dance event in Southport is facing 2 new charges. 18-year-old Axel Ruda-Cabana has already been charged with 3 counts of murder. But these new separate charges include one of terror after police say they found a biological toxin and an Al-Qaeda training manual in a search of his home. Well, some of the country's top politicians have raised questions about the timing of the announcement, including Conservative leadership candidates Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch. Well, let's cross live to Westminster. Our political correspondent Liz Bates is there for us. So Liz, some political figures raising questions then?
Yes, lots of political reaction to the latest on the Southport attack tonight. First of all, let me bring you a statement from the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. What she has said in response is these additional charges will undoubtedly be distressing for people in Southport. The most important thing is to get justice for Bibi, Alice and Elsie and their heartbroken families and all those affected by the attack, and nobody should put that at risk. The police and prosecutors have an important job to do in their investigation, pursuing every avenue and taking the action they need to ahead of the trial. We must support them and ensure that everything possible is done to deliver justice. Now, I think, first of all, as well, it's important to put this in context. When the Southport attack first happened over the summer, there were real issues around misinformation and conspiracy theories circulating online, and that is, I think, what in part sparked a lot of the awful reaction that we saw in the wake of that. We move to the situation now and the new information that we've had today. We've had some reaction from the Conservative leadership candidates, the last 2 in the race. First of all, Robert Jenrick. I spoke to him earlier this evening. This is what he said.
As the father of 3 young daughters, my heart goes out to the victims and the families of this terrible atrocity. And the legal process needs to be respected. But for months, we have been told that this was not a terror-related incident. And yet we learned today that the suspect allegedly was viewing Al-Qaeda manuals and had access to dangerous substances like ricin. This raises very serious questions. The public have a right to know information straight on an issue of such high public interest. So I think those questions now need to be asked. What did Keir Starmer know, and when did he know it?
There's also been reaction from Kemi Badenoch. She did release a longer statement, but I'll just bring you some of the main points. What she said is that it is now quite clear that there are serious questions to be asked of the police, the CPS, and also of Keir Starmer's response to the whole situation. Parliament is the right place for this to happen. The government has responded to accusations that any information has been withheld from the public. They say that is not correct. Charging decisions and their timing, they say, are for the CPS and the CPS alone.
OK, Liz, thanks very much. Now, a new radioactive therapy has shrunk a man's deadly brain tumour in half in what experts hope could be a breakthrough cancer treatment. Paul Reed was diagnosed with recurrent glioblastoma last December. It's a type of brain cancer that kills most patients within 18 months. After initial treatments failed to stop the tumour growing, the 62-year-old engineer from Luton was offered the chance to become the first patient in a clinical trial. And just weeks after starting the experimental treatment, his tumour has shrunk by half. Well, Dr. Paul Mulholland is consultant medical oncologist who's leading the study at University College London Hospital, and he told me about Paul's condition.
So Paul has glioblastoma, which is the most aggressive form of primary brain cancer. The average survival for these patients is about 9 months, and 3,000 people a year die from this disease in the UK alone. So Paul had his surgery and then 6 weeks of radiotherapy and chemotherapy, and unfortunately within 3 months of completing that, his tumour grew again, and we put him onto this clinical trial. This trial is a first-in-humans trial. It's the first time that this has been given to a human, this drug. And we knew when we were designing the trial that the drug wouldn't get across into the brain because there's a barrier to block drugs and viruses and other things to getting into your brain to protect us. So we're working very closely with the surgeons at Queen Square who've been absolutely fantastic and enthusiastic with the trial. And Miss Sethi operated on Paul, and she inserted a tube that goes directly into the tumour and goes through the skull, and there's a little port on the outside of the skull, and then that's enclosed under the skin so no infection can get in. And 10 days after the operation, quite a straightforward operation for the neurosurgeons at Queen Square, we were able to inject the first of the injections for the drug. So Paul's had 6 injections over 6 weeks, and we were extremely pleased to see that he got a 50% reduction in the tumour.
Which is incredible. Sorry to cut in there, but that is an amazing result so far. So give us an idea of what happens now. Do you continue the treatment? Is your hope that you can reduce the size of the tumour still further?
So because it is a phase 1 trial, we've only given him 6 weeks treatment. At this stage, we're not in a position to give him any more treatment, and we've enrolled other patients onto the study. So we've got 2 more patients on the study. The second patient is receiving the drug. The third patient has had their operation in preparation to receive the drug. So we're planning to enroll 14 patients over the next 12 months. And then we have plans to be ambitious with this, to combine it with other drugs. And one of the reasons I wanted to come on and talk to you today is because we want to ask the pharmaceutical industry to come forward and to partner with us. And we're looking for particularly immunotherapy or any other treatments that could be combined with this treatment, because we want to see very dramatic responses for this patient group.
Well, yes, and obviously reducing the size of a tumour is incredibly positive progress, but what does that mean for the outcomes of these patients who are undergoing these trials? Does it mean that they will live longer?
Yeah, absolutely. So Paul is extremely well. His survival when he had recurrent disease was only about 5 months. He's had this treatment, his tumour's halved, and we're very hopeful that this will extend his life. We want to be ambitious and we'd like to cure people, and Siobhan McDonough, who's Dame Siobhan McDonough, who's an MP, has a campaign to find a cure for brain cancer. Sadly, she lost her sister, Baroness McDonough, last year. And in this campaign, she's committed to supporting industry to come in and provide clinical trials for brain cancer patients, because it's only through new agents in clinical trials that we're going to find the cure for this disease.
And do you believe that's possible? Do you have hope that that is possible to cure this form of disease?
100% that is possible. Yes, and I want really to ask the pharmaceutical industry, the key decision makers in the large companies, to put it on their agenda and say which of our assets can we assist in this programme with, and actually to realise that this isn't a hopeless case when you have glioblastoma, that actually it is treatable, and that we should all really join forces to help this patient group. 3,000 people dying a year, all those families affected, all that loss.
Absolutely, it would make a huge difference to so many lives, wouldn't it, to make more progress. Were you yourself even surprised by the level of success that this treatment had?
I shouldn't say I was, but I'm usually very happy if we have stable disease. And yes, I was surprised, and I think the whole team were surprised.
Coming up here on the UK Tonight, the child doppelgangers who really, really want to get the mini Spice Girls back together. And Man United move to appoint Ruben Amorim as their new manager. We'll have that and the rest of the day's sport.
Are you ready to make your voices heard?
As America votes,
Win, 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 win.
Get ready for an election night like no other.
Join our team stateside
as we get close to the action
and bring you the results as they arrive.
with full reaction and comprehensive analysis, guiding you through the night.
In an election which could have huge consequences around the world.
America Votes, Election Night, live. Get the full story first on Sky News.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world, the likes of Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Sir Elton John. We try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Hello, welcome back. Still to come on the show, we're going to hear from the mini Spice Girls trying to get the band back together. If you didn't know what a mini Spice Girl was, then stay tuned. In the meantime, Teddy's here with all the day's sport.
and
yeah, you're going to have to stay tuned, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. Look forward to that.
Manchester United, let's talk about this man.
Yes.
Because it looks like he could be the new manager. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. This is Ruben Amorim, who is a 39-year-old Portuguese coach, currently head coach of Sporting Lisbon, where he's won a couple of league titles in the past few years. He's only been a coach for 6 years. But we perceive him to be very close to becoming the Manchester United manager to replace not Sir Alex Ferguson, I was going to say, that's a long time ago, but Erik ten Hag, of course, who was dismissed yesterday by Manchester United. Now, he has been a coach for 6 years. He was a player before that, played for Sporting, won a couple of league titles. He's somebody who represented Portugal, perhaps not with great distinction in terms of his playing career, but his coaching career really took off. He was Braga B coach around 5 years ago, got promoted to the first team, won a competition with them. Sporting came in, and it's been a bit of a revelation there. He's been linked with West Ham United and Liverpool in past seasons, but now it looks like it's going to be Sporting giving way to Manchester United because they've gone to the Portuguese Stock Exchange. As a limited company, they have to say that there's been an interest. They say that Manchester United have indicated they're prepared to pay the €10 million, around £8.3 million, to release Amorim to talk to United. Speaks fluent English, by the way, charismatic character.
That is a lot of money.
It is.
To be released. But it could have been even more, I think, if it was a different club after him. Is that right?
Potentially, yeah. I think it could have been. There's a contract in there. I think there's also the sense of what they're going to have to pay for Erik ten Hag, around a £13 million payoff. This is in the context of turnover of £660 million for Manchester United, but they have been making losses the past few seasons. There's profit sustainability in the Premier League to account for. So I think it's a question of whether they can get him in for the weekend against Chelsea, because that's the Premier League game. They've got the League Cup game tomorrow, which Ruud van Nistelrooy is in interim charge, former Manchester United striker. So that'll be an emotional night tomorrow against Leicester. but they had a huge challenge against Chelsea. And it's interesting how Ruben Amorim, we hope to hear from him. They're playing tonight against Nacional, so he hasn't been able to speak to the press yet. Sky Sports News reporter Gary Cottrell, who's a very determined character, is out there and hoping to get a word in English with him after that match in the Portuguese League Cup tonight. We'll get some clarity on the situation, but we understand he is interested in the Manchester United position, has been interested in England before, and it would be another big challenge for him, as it has been for everyone, as I mentioned, slip of the tongue for Alex Ferguson, succeeding him. We had David Moyes, we've had Louis van Gaal, we've had Jose Mourinho, of course, a legendary Portuguese manager, a generation or so ahead of Ruben Amorim, and we've had Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and we've had Erik ten Hag. So it's been a big shoes to fill, and no one's quite pulled it off yet.
And amazing if he does get into the job by the weekend. What will the fans make of it?
I think the fans are generally positive. I think the internet now makes it a lot easier to research personalities. Of course, the two legendary figures in their history have been Scottish, Sir Matt Busby, Sir Alex Ferguson, but it seems a very international future now. Of course, it's David Moyes was a Scottish manager who took over, but it's very much looking outwards. He's a coach. He'll fit into the hierarchy system of structure, sporting directors, CEOs they've got at Manchester United now. So I think hopefully a lot of fans optimistic that he can turn it around. They sit 14th in the Premier League at the moment. So that's Manchester United. We'll update you momentarily as well on England's women who are in action right now.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
How do you feel about yourself as a black woman competing in the sport? Do you feel like anything has changed, improved, gone worse?
Having athletes like you, I think it's really empowering and really inspiring. But I think, you know, it also comes with its challenges. In every aspect of the sport, like the coaching, like I think we can do a better job, and it's nice that we're pushing the barriers and seeing black females at the top, but it's not easy for us. Just getting us into these spaces, I feel like is really important, like having our voices heard and having our needs met and people kind of understanding it on all levels.
I think my narrative is different depending on who I talk to. It is important that we understand that our narratives sometimes is what we think of ourselves and also is what other people think of us. And sometimes they're not the same.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Now, everyone of a certain age will remember this 90s hit. Well, that's Mama, of course, by the Spice Girls. Well, two women who acted in the video as child doppelgangers of the singers are trying to reunite the rest of that group. 5 young girls and 5 older girls played child versions of Scary, Posh, Sporty, Baby and Ginger. And they include Shana de Rosario, who played Baby Spice, seen here in the middle, when she was just 3 years old. And Shana joins me now. Very good evening to you, Shana. Thanks so much for talking to us. First of all, tell us a little bit about your role in that video. What did you and the other Spice Girls, mini Spice Girls, I should say, have to do? We got a bit of a taste of it there in that clip we showed, but explain what you had to do.
So it was a bit of a fun day, really, for us, and I can't actually remember that much of it because of my age. So I do remember turning up to the house in London where the video was shot, and I saw the camera for the first time and was absolutely terrified. So in the first shot where you see me dressed as a fairy, I'm actually crying. But the production team did make it a very fun day. There was lots of games, lots of dressing up and lots of playing in the park as well.
And you now want to bring the rest of the mini Spice Girls back together. You want to get the band back together, basically, don't you? So what gave you that idea?
So it was a few years ago now. It was around their 25th anniversary for the release of their debut album. And it got quite big on social media. So I just put it up and saw what happened, and it went viral. And a lot of people were sharing it, a lot of fan pages were sharing it. And I managed to get into contact with Alice, who played a young Victoria Beckham. And we tried to share it a bit further, but we couldn't find the last 3 and unfortunately didn't get the group back together again.
And you're still looking for them. So how many are there in total? Is there a younger age group and an older age group? How many mini Spice Girls are there that you're trying to track down?
So for me, I was only part of the youngest group, so there was 5 of us all together, but the whole video does show different groups of the girls at different stages in their life. But for me, it is just that younger group that you see in that photo.
And what are you going to do if you do get everyone together?
So we would just like to reconnect, really, and just see how everyone's getting on and what they're doing, if they continued anything in the industry. And if we did manage to all meet up, we wanted to have a look at maybe remaking something, maybe a part of the video or even just the photo that we got back in the 90s.
Will that involve singing?
Probably not.
That's not something that you want to do?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
And what about, are you sort of Spice Girls fan? Has it meant that because of those, perhaps a bit vague because you were so young, but because of those memories, have you felt a connection to them? Have you found that you've followed their career with more interest?
I think so, yeah. I mean, as you say, I was very, very young, but because I was lucky enough to be a part of something that was so iconic back then, I just naturally fell into it. So I got their video and I got their music and I used to listen to their CDs. And yeah, they did become a little part of my childhood.
Are you hoping for another reunion tour?
That would be lovely. And I'm sure all the fans across the world would love that.
Well, yeah, and maybe they could do with some of their grown-up mini Spice Girls joining them.
Well, that would be a dream.
Well, good luck with your search, Shana. I hope you track down more than just the one other and you have a few memories to compare notes over. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Great stuff. Now, going to take a look at what the weather's up to now. And it's been looking pretty quiet and mild into next week, but it is going to be quite cloudy with a little bit of rain or some drizzle in places, as well as some overnight mist and fog. There'll be a rather cloudy but mainly dry evening, although a few light showery outbreaks are still possible, mostly over parts of northern Scotland. It'll stay quite cloudy tonight with a little bit of rain or drizzle in places, mainly over parts of northern and central Scotland. Expect fog on the hills and at low levels where cloud breaks for any length of time elsewhere. Southern England and areas to the southeast of high ground seem most at risk. It'll be mild generally and chilly in the far north. And tomorrow morning looks rather grey again, I'm afraid, with plenty of low cloud and early fog. That's all from the UK Tonight. You can catch up on all the highlights on our webpage. Just scan the QR code on screen. Up next is The World with Yalda Hakim.